All right, so today we're diving into one of the most well-known, I guess, infamous studies in social psychology,
Yeah.
the Milgram experiment.
The big one.
It really kind of shook things up back in the 60s,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and it still gets people talking and debating about human nature.
Oh, yeah.
So today we're going to get into that,
Absolutely.
and we're going to see how far people are willing to go
Mm-hmm.
when a person of authority
Right.
tells them to do something that
Yeah.
they might
I
not,
feel good about.
feel good about.
Yeah, it's a real landmark study that makes us face some uncomfortable truths about ourselves.
Yeah.
I mean, we like to think we're independent and, we would never hurt anyone.
Right.
But Milgram showed us that
Yeah.
the situation we're in, the social pressures, can really have a big effect on what we do.
For sure.
Yeah.
So for anyone who might not know,
Yeah.
let's break down how the Milgram experiment worked.
Okay, so imagine you're volunteering for a study at Yale.
Mm-hmm.
You think it's about memory and learning. You get there, you meet another volunteer, and then the guy running the experiment.
Okay.
You draw straws to figure out who does what, and you end up as the teacher.
Okay.
The other volunteer is the learner.
Got it.
Now the learner gets strapped to a chair
Go
and hooked up to something that looks like it can give electric shocks.
Mm-hmm.
Your job, the teacher,
Yeah.
is to ask the learner questions
Right.
and give them stronger and stronger shocks every time they mess up.
And here's the thing.
Yeah.
The shocks aren't real.
Right.
The learner's an actor. It's all fake. But the teacher doesn't know that.
They have no idea.
You see the learner strapped in, you hear them making sounds like they're in pain,
Yeah.
and you've got the experimenter pushing you to keep going.
Right.
It's a lot of pressure.
It is.
And what Milgram found
Yeah.
was most of the people,
Or majority.
like a full 65%,
It's wild.
kept listening to the experimenter
Mhm.
and went all the way to the highest shock,
450 volts.
even though the learner was yelling for them to stop.
Yeah, it's easy to say, oh, I would never do that.
Right.
But these were regular people.
Yeah, just like us.
Just like us.
They weren't evil or anything.
Right. They were just normal folks who got caught up in the situation.
Yeah, you can get swept up in it.
And that's what's so disturbing.
Yeah.
Milgram showed that in the right circumstances, anyone could be pushed to do things they never thought possible.
It's scary to think about.
It is.
Now, some people did say no,
Oh, yeah.
like Gretchen Brandt. She stopped at 150 volts
Mm-hmm.
and said,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't think we should continue.
Right.
But most people didn't.
They didn't.
So what Milgram wanted to know
Yeah.
was what makes people obey.
What are those factors?
Yeah.
And that's where it gets really interesting.
Right.
Milgram changed up the experiment in different ways to see what would happen.
Okay, so let's go through some of these variations.
Yeah.
One that stood out to me was how close the teacher was to the learner.
Oh, the proximity?
Yeah.
Right.
The closer they were, the less likely they were to keep going.
Exactly when they were in the same room.
Yeah.
Obedience dropped a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And when they had to actually hold the learner's hand on the shock plate,
Oh, wow.
even fewer went all the way.
Yeah, it's like being close to the learner
Mm-hmm.
made their pain more real.
Right. You couldn't ignore it.
You couldn't detach yourself.
It broke down that barrier.
And what about when the experimenter wasn't in the room?
Ah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
When they gave instructions over the phone,
Mm-hmm.
obedience really tanked.
Interesting. So that face-to-face,
Yeah.
having them right there,
That authority figure right there.
made a huge difference.
Absolutely. It shows how much being in that moment
Mm-hmm.
with someone urging you on can affect you.
Right, but it's not just physical closeness.
Yeah.
You mentioned social distance, too.
Yes.
What did you mean by that?
So in some versions of the experiment, they added another teacher
Okay.
who was actually in on it.
Right, a Confederate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This fake teacher would either keep obeying or refuse to go on.
And what did that do?
Seeing that defiant peer had a huge impact.
Really?
Yeah, the real participant was way more likely to disobey too.
So if they saw someone else stand up to the authority,
Mm-hmm.
they felt like they could, too.
It's like it gave them permission.
Wow, that's amazing.
It is.
It shows how strong social influence is,
Powerful stuff.
even when you feel like there's so much at stake.
Exactly.
But did everyone react the same way?
That's where it gets complicated.
Yeah.
It's not just about some people having authoritarian personalities.
Right.
Although that does play a role.
Okay.
Milgram found all sorts of things mattered, like gender,
Right.
religion.
Yeah.
But not always in the ways you'd expect.
So we've seen how being close to the learner
Mm-hmm.
and having someone else say no
Yeah,
can make people less obedient.
right.
But what about the setting?
Interesting question.
Being at Yale,
Yeah. Such a prestigious place.
you'd think that would make people more likely to obey.
You would think so.
How would it?
Well, they moved the experiment from Yale
Okay.
to a regular office building in Bridgeport, Connecticut.
Much less prestigious.
Right, and
Yeah.
obedience only dropped a little bit.
So it wasn't just the experimenter or where they were.
It seems there's something deeper going on.
Like something fundamental about us.
Yeah, it's like we're wired to obey authority.
Even if they don't have any real power over us.
Exactly.
But didn't people feel bad about what they were doing?
Absolutely. That's what's so fascinating. You could
Right.
see the struggle in a lot of them.
Mm.
They'd hesitate, sweat, argue with the experimenter,
Right.
but they'd still keep giving the shocks.
Like Fred Prosy.
Yeah, poor guy.
He kept saying things like, oh God, let's stop it.
I know.
But he still went all the way to 450 volts.
It's tough to read those transcripts.
Yeah, it shows even when we know something's wrong,
Mm-hmm.
it can be really hard to disobey authority.
It is.
But here's where it gets interesting.
Okay.
When they let people choose the shock level,
Without any pressure.
no pressure from the experimenter.
Most of them chose really low shocks.
That's right.
So they weren't enjoying hurting someone.
It wasn't sadism.
It was the pressure of this situation.
The authority figure pushing them.
Yeah, that made them do things they normally wouldn't.
Exactly. It raises the question, though.
Yeah.
If it wasn't about being cruel or lacking empathy,
Mm-hmm.
what was going on in their heads?
Right. What allowed them to keep going?
Yeah, when they were so clearly upset.
That's what we'll get into next.
One way to think about it is this idea of the agentic state.
Okay.
It's this mental shift where people see themselves as just carrying out orders,
Right.
not really making their own choices.
So, like, I'm not responsible. It's the boss's fault.
Exactly. And that can be really powerful.
Yeah.
It helps people detach from what they're doing
Mhm.
and just focus on the task.
Which in this case
Yeah.
was giving those shocks.
Right.
It's kind of scary how easily people can do that.
It is. And Milgram saw this happen a lot.
How people who went all the way to the end
Yeah.
would later say, well, the experimenter told me to.
So they basically turned off their own morals.
They kind of became tools of the experimenter.
But does that mean we have no free will?
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
We're all influenced by others,
Sure.
but we can still choose.
Right. Milgram showed that obedience isn't guaranteed.
Exactly. There are things that can make us more or less likely to obey.
Right. Like being close to the learner
Proximity,
or
yeah.
seeing someone else disobey.
Powerful stuff.
And I know Milgram also looked at what happens when you mess with the authority itself.
Yeah, he did.
What did he find?
Some really thought-provoking stuff.
Like what?
Well, in one variation,
Okay.
he had two experimenters
Okay.
who started disagreeing with each other.
Oh, wow. So now there's two authority figures?
Right.
And they're not even on the same page.
Exactly. And it threw the participants off.
Really?
Yeah, almost everyone stopped giving shocks.
Interesting. So it's like they need that clear authority.
They didn't know who to listen to anymore.
The spell was broken.
Exactly.
What about when the authority figure isn't in charge anymore?
Ah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Milgram actually had the experimenter and the learner switch places.
Oh.
So now the guy getting shocked was giving the orders.
Did people still obey?
You'd think they'd stop seeing him in pain,
Right.
but they didn't. Almost everyone kept going.
That's wild.
It's like the experimenter's authority was tied to his role.
Not who he was as a person,
Exactly.
but what if the authority isn't even a scientist?
Ah, that's another variation.
Yeah.
They had a regular person come in,
Okay.
pretending to be another volunteer.
A Confederate.
Right.
Okay.
And this guy would start telling the real participant to increase the shocks.
So no lab coat.
Nope, just a regular guy.
Did people listen to him?
Well, obedience did go down,
Okay.
but it was still higher than you'd expect.
So even without the fancy title.
Yeah, that social pressure was still there.
Fascinating.
It seems we're just wired to follow directions.
Especially when we're not sure what to do.
Right. In unfamiliar situations.
But what about the people who did say no?
Ah, the resistors.
What made them different?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
It's probably a mix of things. Some people just have a stronger sense of right and wrong. Others might be more skeptical of authority.
Or maybe more assertive.
Exactly, comfortable standing up for themselves.
So it's this interplay of personality and the situation.
Yeah, it's complicated.
But before we go there,
Okay.
I want to talk more about group influence.
Ah, yes. We saw how defiant peers can make people disobey.
Right.
But what about the opposite?
When the group actually encourages obedience.
That's a good question. He did, yeah. It's pretty amazing what he found.
So tell me about it.
Okay, so they added 2 more teachers to the mix,
Okay.
but they were actually in on the experiment.
Right. Confederates.
Right, and they were told to always obey no matter what.
Even when the learner was in pain.
Yep, they just kept going.
So the real participant is seeing all this.
Yeah, surrounded by people who are following orders.
Must have been intense.
It was, and you know what?
What?
Most of them caved. 36 out of 40 went all the way.
Wow. That's a big difference.
Huge.
So wanting to fit in with the group,
That need to conform?
yeah, can be stronger than our own sense of what's right.
It's like we look to others to tell us how to act.
Especially when we're not sure what to do.
Exactly. And if everyone's doing it,
It's harder to say no.
even if it feels wrong,
It's like the group changes what's acceptable.
it sets a new standard,
And in this case, that standard was obedience.
even if it meant hurting someone.
Yeah, it makes you think about all sorts of things.
It does mobs, political movements, even just workplaces.
Right? Groups can really change how we behave
They can make us see things differently.
and do things we wouldn't do on our own.
Absolutely.
Kind of scary, but also fascinating.
It is, but it also shows how important it is to think for yourself.
Right. Just because everyone else is doing it.
Doesn't make it right.
We have to listen to our own conscience.
That's the big takeaway from Milgram's work.
It's not just some old study.
It tells us something about who we are.
That we can be good and bad.
And sometimes the difference is really small.
It's a reminder that we can't just go with the flow.
You need to question things.
Stand up for what we believe in.
Otherwise,
Yeah,
blind obedience can lead to terrible things.
exactly. So we need to understand these forces
The power of authority, conformity, social pressure,
and make conscious choices.
about how we react to them.
So next time you're asked to do something that feels wrong,
Yeah.
remember Milgram.
He showed us what can happen.
Ask yourself, who's giving the orders?
What are the consequences?
And what does your gut tell you?
Those are important questions.
We are.
You might be surprised by the answers.
Well, that's it for our deep dive into the Milgram experiment.
It's a lot to think about.
It is, but it's important stuff.
Sure.
We hope you learned something.
And maybe feel inspired to question the world a little bit.
Until next time, keep learning
Keep exploring.
and keep diving deep.